A Russian tanker filled with crude oil has reached Cuba. The Trump administration allowed it to go through after blocking shipments for weeks and diverting a vessel with Russian diesel on March 20th. After U.S. forces abducted Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro in January, they've been demanding a regime change in Cuba too, topple the government to lift the embargo. Cuba has seen a severe shortage of fuel since then, with rolling blackouts and disrupted health, food and water services. Reports indicate the tanker has 730,000 barrels of crude oil on board. It will be the first shipment to reach Havana in several weeks. Here is the Kremlin spokesperson talking about how essential that shipment is for Cuba.
Under the severest blockade, our Cuban friends need petroleum products and oil. This is essential for the country's life support systems, for generating electricity, and for providing medical and other services to the population. And of course, Russia considers it its duty not to stand aside, but to provide the necessary assistance to our Cuban friends. Of course, this cannot leave us indifferent, so we will continue to work on this issue.
Cecile Shea is an expert on security and diplomacy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in the U.S. Hi, Cecile. Thanks for joining us today. The current U.S. blockade came into effect in late January. Can you give us a sense of what the last 2 months of blockade has meant for people in Cuba?
Well, of course, this blockade is on top of 60 years of a near total trade embargo by the U.S. against Cuba. But until January, the U.S. did not try to prohibit other countries from delivering most products to Cuba, certainly fuel. Without any fuel, Cuba is really in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. They need oil to produce electricity, and without electricity, they are seeing medical procedures canceled. People are maybe having difficulty getting their kidney dialysis. People are not able to get to work. If they can find gasoline right now is on the black market is something like $35 a gallon, which I think is maybe $8 or $9 a liter. So it's very expensive. Without electricity, most of the hotels have had to close, which means a lot of people are out of work. You need electricity to run elevators. So even though Americans can't visit Cuba, people from other countries can, and it's an important source of economic vitality for the country. There are growing food shortages, so I could go on and on, but yes, it's a situation of real humanitarian hardship in Cuba right now.
Tell us, why is President Trump so interested in Cuba anyway?
So there's various reasons. Cuba has been a thorn in the side of every U.S. president since Dwight David Eisenhower. In particular, the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 1960s, which led to the 13 most dangerous days in human history. I mean, World War III, a nuclear holocaust easily could have occurred during that time. President Trump was in high school at the time. President Biden, who also had very strong anti-Cuba policies when he was president for the previous 4 years, President Biden was in college. So for them, the stresses between Cuba and the U.S. are very visceral. It's interesting. President Obama was born in the early 60s, and for him, it was a little more academic. And so he was willing to pull back on some of the embargoes. But this is something that President Trump has lived with his whole life. And to be fair to President Trump, Cuba has engaged in deeply troubling behavior 90 miles from the United States. They have supported revolutions throughout this hemisphere and in the Middle East, supported terrorist groups. They harbor fugitives who are wanted in the U.S., including American citizen fugitives. So their behavior, particularly up until the time and fall of the Soviet Union, has been really quite troubling for the U.S. Less so since then, which is one of the reasons that President Obama was willing to open relations a bit. But President Biden pushed back on a lot of those changes, and now we have President Trump, who's taken quite a hard line against Cuba.
Maybe you can join the dots for us. All of this history, what is the oil blockade supposed to achieve?
What President Trump has said is that he is seeking regime change in Cuba. He wants an end to the communist regime in Cuba. This is, not an idea that is foreign to the people of Cuba. Many of them would like a different leadership. They would like a more open society. However, Cuba, as authoritarian regimes go, does not have a really horrible human rights record. They do have political prisoners, but they are nowhere near the types of autocratic regimes that you see in other parts of the world that the US or other countries have tried to pressure for regime change. But he says he wants regime change and will accept nothing less. So there are other smaller things that he has asked for. And interestingly, since this oil embargo started, Cuba has apparently offered to do most of these things. Cuba has offered to allow Cuban expats to invest in Cuba again. They have offered to release the political prisoners, which would be huge, because if you release the political prisoners, then there's a political opposition. So actually, they have agreed to almost everything that the U.S. has been demanding since January, with the exception of the leaders will not resign. They are saying that is something that they will not countenance.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to play a short clip for you. It's a recent comment from President Trump on the crude oil tanker. Let's take a listen.
It doesn't bother me much. It's not going to have an impact. Cuba's finished. They have a bad regime. They have very bad and corrupt leadership. And whether or not they get a boat of oil, it's not going to matter. I'd prefer letting it in, whether it's Russia or anybody else, because the people need heat and cooling and all of the other things. Cuba's a mess. It's a failing country, and they're going to be next. Within a short period of time, it's going to fail. And we will be there to help it out.
Some conflicting statements there. Why has Trump, in your assessment, allowed the tanker to go through now?
That's a big mystery. Imagine it right now if you are the chairman of ExxonMobil or if you are the president of Mexico, who are not allowed to export oil or even just to give oil to Cuba. But you see Russia, a country that is helping Iran at the moment in the hostilities in which we are engaged, is being allowed to have this huge public relations win by delivering a tanker of oil to Cuba. It makes no sense. A lot of President Trump's decisions are made on the fly. He goes by his gut. One day he does one thing, the next day he does another. He clearly has kind of understood finally that there is a humanitarian catastrophe underway there. But with a little more planning, the U.S. could have been the big hero and exported some oil to Cuba, or we could have allowed Mexico to export oil to Cuba. The president there has said today that she's considering just shipping some anyway, and she doesn't care if Trump at this point puts new sanctions or tariffs on Mexico. We'll see if that happens. But to me, as an American, first of all, who wants to help my economy, but also just as someone who, wants to see the U.S. regain its moral position in the world, we've lost so much of that in the last year. This, to me, just seems a disaster. We're giving a win to Putin.
And how significant is the amount of oil on this tanker? Can it, for instance, sustain Cubans for some weeks, some months?
The estimate is maybe a month with careful use. They meaning the Cuban government, is trying to install solar panels at a much faster rate. That will help a little bit. But they need oil to run their power plants still, and they need oil for transportation. So this is a temporary fix. It might get them 3 or 4 weeks. Perhaps it will enable Cuba to negotiate with the U.S. and to move a little bit further. The U.S. is so preoccupied with Iran right now. I can't imagine that the Trump administration is investing huge amounts of energy into negotiating with Cuba. Remember that a lot of the State Department was fired a year ago during the downsizing of the government. So we have limited resources in places to work on these issues. But it will buy them a little bit of time. Hopefully it will save some lives. But I just hope that the next tanker of oil is not from Russia. I would love for it to be from us or from Mexico or just about from anywhere else.
You've talked a bit about the compromises that the Cuban government is willing to make. What about the ordinary Cubans? What can they do? What should they do?
So this is one of the misunderstandings of this Trump administration, I fear. It's harder to foment a revolution when you're in a police state. I mean, this is what this administration and apparently the Netanyahu administration have misunderstood in Iran. They thought that people would rise up against the Revolutionary Guard while they are being bombarded by rockets. Well, that's not going to happen. It's also very hard to rise up against the central government in Cuba, which is a police state and controls all of the levers of power there. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the leaders themselves are not psychotic like you see in some other countries. The leaders of Cuba do want what's best for their people. And I think they are looking for a way to perhaps appease the Trump administration without completely stepping down from power. One interesting thing is that it appears that some of the Castro family, which is still around the margins of the government, but has not been in an official position of leadership for several years, it appears that this embargo has actually strengthened some of them. So that's the last thing that the United States needed. So I just don't think that this most recent embargo, that not allowing any country to deliver oil, I don't think it was well planned, and there's a risk that it will backfire against the U.S. in many different ways.
I have to ask, how do you see all of this playing out over the next weeks?
So I was actually hoping that President Trump by now would have been able to declare victory, say, we have these important concessions from the Cuban government. We are therefore willing to drop part of the embargo. Maybe we'll let 10,000 tourists into the country next year. I mean, there's various ways he could have declared victory as long as the political prisoners who were released were allowed to stay in the country. He also could have, and maybe someone is doing this. I wish I had more faith in the process, but maybe someone is. They could say to the people in power, okay, we'll let you stay for 3 more years, but we need an election. We need an election in 2 years or in 3 years. And you don't even have to use us as observers. You can send the European Union in as observers. There need to be observers. It will be a free and fair election. And then we will move forward. I fear that would take a level of competence that we have not really seen in this administration up till now. But that is what I would like to see, and that would be the ideal situation: is take the win, get a promise of an election in 2 or 3 years, and then start opening things up with a country that, after all, is only 90 miles from our own country.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and all of this nuance to the conflict. Cecile Shea from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs.
Thank you.
What do you think? Why did President Trump allow the tanker to pass through? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye for now.